Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to hop into my design process for creating a movie poster design for a new detective drama. I'm super inspired by the poster artwork for films such as A Small Town Crime, To Catch a Killer, and True Detective. So we're going to use those as a jumping off point, and we're going for some moody and eerie vibes. Now, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to 1. Choose the right images to help you tell your story. Number 2, how to use those images and composite them together to create a cohesive poster design. Number 3, how to work with custom brushes to add cool atmospheric elements that will help add realism to your poster. And 4, how to get that really high quality cinematic looking finish on your final poster design. So let's get right into it. All right, so to get started, the first thing we're going to do when we open up Photoshop is set up our document. And because we're going to be creating a movie poster, we're going to use a standard movie poster size, such as 18 by 24, okay? And this is like a standard vertical size or portrait size for a one sheet or a piece of key art. All right, so let's go ahead and click Create to set that up. And we now have our new document. So the very first thing I want to do here is start off with an image. So I'm going to go to File, Place Embedded, and I'm just going to navigate to my first stock photo here. And that's going to be this image of a car. All right, so once I have this, I'll go ahead and click Place to bring this into my document. And you'll notice right off the bat that the file is automatically imported with a file name, and it's also converted into a smart object, which is great. Okay, so what that means is that we can resize this and it will always retain the quality, as opposed to a raster image, which after you resize it a couple of times, it's going to look worse and worse and worse. Okay, so what I'd like to do here is just kind of get the car and maybe a little bit of the ground. So I'm going to double click this smart object to open it up, press Command J to create a copy of it, and then I'm just going to begin to trace around the top and the front of the car a little bit, and then we can worry about cleaning up the windows and removing the driver from the car. Okay, so hopefully you don't mind me just kind of speeding up that part of the process a little bit. All I'm doing essentially is using the pen tool and my brush tool with my trusty drawing tablet here to cut out the top portion of the car. So now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to removing the windows. Now, obviously for this part, we need to sort of remove the driver from the car as well. So I'm going to start off by just blocking out the main shape of the window, and then we'll go back and just kind of clean up the parts where we still see pieces of the driver, okay? Because we want to try to remove all of that so we get a nice clean selection. All right, so now that we've done that portion of it and we've selected the outside of the car and we've kind of gotten rid of the driver, there's still an arm in there and we probably have to clean up the steering wheel a little bit too. So what I'm going to do is zoom in here, press S on my keyboard to get my clone stamp tool, and make sure that my opacity is set to maybe around like 70 or so. It doesn't have to be too high, not 100%. But then all I'm going to do is hold the Alt Option key and sample some of the steering wheel here, and then just click and paint on top of it, right? And that will help us get rid of the hand here. But if I want to be even more precise and maybe not mess up this bottom edge of the window, what I'll do first is create a selection that goes all the way over here to the edge. All right, and then I'm just going to click up here to kind of close this shape, because this is the shape that we're going to be concentrating on fixing. Let's just go ahead and finish tracing this part. And so now I will continue just using my clone stamp tool to come in here and start cleaning this up. Okay, so we've now sort of removed those extra elements of the driver from the car, and we have a pretty good selection here. So what I'm going to do is hold the Control key, click on that layer and choose Convert to Smart Object, and then I'm going to bring it back into our main document. All right, so I'm just going to click and drag here, choose Yes to proceed, and then copy the file name from the original, paste it in here, get rid of that one. Now, the reason I did that instead of just saving the smart object is because sometimes you'll get an error where it's asking you to merge the image before you can paste it in. Okay, so now that we have this in here, I'm going to press Command T to do a free transform, hold Control, click on the car, and choose Flip Horizontal. And from here, I'm going to position it somewhere down here towards like the lower part of the image, maybe a little bit up from the bottom here. Somewhere about there looks pretty good. All right, so now that we've got our car in here, let's go ahead and hold the Alt Option key and add a curves adjustment layer and check off this box here that says use previous layer to create a clipping mask so that we can clip it to our car. Now, as for the settings here, all I'm going to do is create a point sort of in the middle of my curves, like in the middle of the grid here. And I want to make sure that the input is set to somewhere around 149 or so. And the output, let's just set it to 99. All right, so that's going to add some contrast to our car here, as you can see. But what I'll do is brush out some of this. So I'm going to grab a large soft round brush and probably just use an opacity of around 20% or so. Okay, and you can see my brush settings up here. It's 1400 pixels in size, opacity 20%, and I have a solid black color selected. And all I'm going to do is kind of brush over the top back area of the car here because I don't want to darken that part too much. Okay, so I've got some nice contrast happening, but we still have a little bit of light coming from outside of the frame. So now let's go ahead and select our car once again, and I will apply a second curves adjustment layer. Then press Command Control and the right bracket to move it up one position in the layers panel here. And for this one, we're going to create another point in the middle, set the input to around 142 and the output to around 108. So it's pretty close to what we had before, but this is just going to darken it a little bit more. And then we can just drop the opacity down a touch, maybe to around 70 or so. Now select the smart object once again, come back down to the adjustment layer icon, and let's add a hue saturation adjustment layer and press Command Control in the right bracket 2 times to move it up in the layer stack. Now with the hue saturation adjustment layer, I'm just going to boost the saturation up to around 20 or so. Okay, just so we get a little bit more saturation there out of the color. Great, it's very subtle, but this will add up over time as we add more and more layers to our composition. Okay, so now I'll select that hue saturation adjustment layer, hold Shift and select my car, press Command G to put it into a group folder, and I'm just going to call this folder car, but you can name it whatever you want. Okay, so now let's add a background behind the car. I'm going to go back to the File menu, go to Place Embedded, and now I will import my next stock photo here, which is going to be another free image from Pexels. And it's this nice image of like a mountain scene with a shed in the background, but it's also kind of creepy. So let's use this, put it below the car, press Command T, and then click and drag out while holding Alt Option on the keyboard. And I'm just going to scale this up quite a bit, zoom out so I can see my bounding box here. All right, and I'm going to position this somewhere around here. Looks pretty good. And maybe just tab it to the left a little bit. Right, something like that, but it just gives some sense of environment, right? We want to know where we are and what's happening so we can kind of set the tone here. Once again, I'm going to hold the Alt Option key, come here to my adjustment layer icon and add a curves adjustment layer, checking off this box to create a clipping mask. This time I'll add another point in the middle, and I'm going to enter the value 147 for the input and 107 for the output. Okay, and that's going to give us a nice bit of contrast there. Now I will select the smart object again, and this time apply a hue saturation adjustment layer, press Command Control in the right bracket once to move that up one spot in the layers palette, and then I'm going to bring the saturation way down to like -50 or 60. All right, we really want to try to start to desaturate some of this image. And I find that a lot of times as you desaturate stuff, it really gets that kind of creepy, moody vibe that we're going for. So from here, let's go ahead and add a color lookup adjustment layer. And again, use Command Control in the right bracket twice to move it up here in the position, because we want it to be on top of that curves adjustment and on top of that hue saturation adjustment layer that we just added. Now over here, you'll see it's asking for a 3D LUT file. So let's go ahead and click on this drop down, and I'm going to go all the way down here and add this one that says night from day. Now mine might look a little bit different than yours just because I have a lot of like 3D LUTs that I've, you know, loaded up, like presets and things like that I've purchased, but you will definitely have this one. It is one of the default ones here that shows up in Photoshop. All right, and then let's go ahead and press 2 on the keyboard to drop the opacity down to about 20%. Right, and you'll see it's adding that nice sort of nighttime effect, but not too overpowering. It kind of matches the color and the tone of the car, which is exactly what we're going for. And now that we've done that, let's hold the Shift key, make sure that you have your color lookup adjustment layer selected, and then click on the actual smart object here for the background, press Command G to put it into a group folder, and I'm just going to call this Mountains. All right, so now that we have that folder set up, let's go ahead and add a new layer. Press B to get your brush tool once again, And I also want to use the same settings that I had before. So grab a brush that's around 1500 pixels in size with an opacity of somewhere around 20%. And all I'm going to do here is hold the Alt Option key to sample some of the color from the ground. And then on my new layer, I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. And I'm just going to start to paint in over the shed a little bit. Okay, somewhere over here, a little bit on the left as well. And then I'm going to add a new adjustment layer, a black and white adjustment layer. Change the blend mode to soft light and drop the opacity down to about 50% by pressing 5 on the keyboard. Now let's select that black and white adjustment layer, hold Shift and select the layer below, press Command G to put it into a group folder, and I'm going to title this folder Shed Light. Now from here I will select the entire folder and change the blending mode to screen. Alright, so it's actually doing the opposite of darkening. We're kind of adding some light actually, but I might need to dial it back. So I'm going to select that layer inside of here and apply a layer mask to it. And then I'm just going to dial it back a little bit by brushing in with black using my low opacity brush. All right, so I'm just adding a little bit of light here on the sides. All right, not too much. All right, something like that looks pretty good, just to bring a little bit of detail out of the lighter parts of the shed. Now let's return to the File menu and let's go ahead and bring in our next image by going to File, Place Embedded. And this time I'm looking for my image of the detective here holding the flashlight, right? So this is a really cool shot. I thought it was very sort of interesting and captivating because you find yourself wondering, well, what is he looking at, right? And that's exactly the kind of energy and emotion that we want to evoke here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and scale this up quite a bit. Hold the Control key, click on the image and choose Flip Horizontal. And then let's go ahead and place him off to the side a little bit, somewhere around here. Maybe make him a little bit smaller. All right, but something like this feels pretty good. All right, but now we need to go ahead and remove that background from the image. Okay, so what I'm going to do is double click on that smart object again, press Command J to make a duplicate of the layer, then turn off the visibility of that background layer, zoom out a little bit, press W on the keyboard to get your magic wand tool, and then up here I will click where it says Select Subject, change this to Cloud, Detailed Results, and then click Select Subject. And this is going to help us get a nice, at least a basic selection for what we want. And you'll see it does an okay job, but we did lose a little bit of the flashlight in here. And there's a couple spots that I'll have to clean up, but it gave us a really great jumping off point. So once you see those marching ants, go ahead and click on the layer mask here, and you will now see your selection. And if you have trouble kind of figuring out if there's any gaps or areas you need to fill in, what I like to do is add a layer in between the two layers, and I'll fill it with like a bright color, something that's, you know, going to make those areas more apparent. And that way, as I'm going in here and filling in those areas in the layer mask, I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. All right, so let's just go ahead and reduce the size of the brush way down. Make sure you have a solid white fill color, raise the opacity, and then I'm just going to brush. All right, I'm going to brush in here so I get the rest of the flashlight. Just try to get a nice edge here. And then there's this area here in the jacket too. So sometimes when you're brushing, you know, what I'll see a lot of designers do is kind of go like this, either with a tablet or a mouse, and you get this kind of weird rounded corner in here. I don't know if you can see that, but what I do to avoid this is I'll just cut right into it, right? So I'll cut right into the jacket like that. And then I'll just press X to toggle my colors here, and I'll just brush that jacket in like this. Okay, so you now get like a nice clean edge there. And as I'm zoomed in, I can see that the flashlight is still a bit choppy. So I'm just going to use my pen tool to create a straight line across, close the shape, press Command, Control, Return on the keyboard, and fill that selection with solid white. And that's at least going to give us a nice straight line going across here, okay? So let's just quickly take a look at the rest of this and see if there's any other areas that we need to fill in. Right, and again, the flashlight is a little bit problematic here, but nothing we can't handle. All right, so I'm just going to use the pen to kind of trace where I think the outline of that flashlight is, and then we will fill it with white and find out what we got. Okay, so that's pretty good. And then I think we have a little area here on the jacket that we just need to clean up. So again, you can either use the brush or the pen tool, totally up to you. I am using a drawing tablet for this, so I like to use the brush in most cases. But for something like this, that's a pretty basic shape that we can fill in. I'm just going to use the pen. Sometimes it's just faster. Okay, but I'm just going to fix this little edge here. Right, and that's good enough. So what I can do now is hide that layer. And if I press Command S on the keyboard, you'll see what I'm saying. It doesn't just allow you to save the smart object all the time. It says, can't save this document back to its original file format, flatten layers and discard extra data, then choose File Save Again. So as a way to just get around that, I'm just going to convert this layer into a smart object. Okay, and just bring it into my document again. Click Yes, okay. And I'm going to have to reposition it and rotate it one more time. So let's hold the Control key and then click on the image and choose Flip Horizontal. And, you know, typically I would not recommend like flipping images like this, especially if you're using, you know, real actors and celebrities or athletes or whatever. A lot of times I would not recommend flipping the image. That's a good way to upset people, right? Because they'll know that something is off. But in this case, you know, just for the demonstration and for the poster here in this tutorial, we're not going to tell anybody. Okay. So again, I'm just going to copy the name, paste it here, get rid of that original. And now we've got our composition starting to come together a little bit. So before we get too much further, I'm just going to go ahead and save this file just to make sure that I don't lose any of the work. Okay, so now that we've got our detective in here, I want to start to apply some adjustments. So I'm going to select that smart object and start by going to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. Now for the settings here, you can play around with this a little bit, but I'm going to use a setting of around 34, just to dial the amount back a little bit. The radius I'll leave set to around 5.8 or 6 pixels, and the threshold is fine at 8. All right, and that's just going to sharpen up some of the details in the image for us. Now once I've done that, I'll press Command G to put this into a group folder, and I'm just going to call it Normal. Okay, and then what I will do is press Command J to duplicate that folder and rename this top copy Shadows Highlights. And the reason why I'm renaming it Shadows and Highlights is because, as you might have guessed, we're going to select this copy, go up here to the image menu and choose Adjustments, Shadows, Highlights. And this is because I want to bring out more details in the darker parts of the image in the shadows here. Okay, so what I like to do when I'm using this is I'll just drag all the highlights down to 0 to start, just to zero those out because I'm only interested in the shadows, these top 3 sliders. All right, so here I'm going to drag the amount down to around 19 or 20. The tone I'll leave set to about 50, and then I'll use a radius of around 30 pixels or so and click OK. Now what I'm going to do is apply a layer mask to that whole folder and use a large soft round brush to just hide certain parts that I don't want to see all the details, right? Because I don't want this uniform, you know, shadows and highlights across the whole image. So I'm just going to dial it back in a few spots. Again, I'll lower the opacity to around 20, make sure that I have a solid black fill color selected, and then I'm going to brush around sort of the side and the back of his head a little bit, over the jacket as well. I only really want to keep the highlights on the part of his face and his arm and sleeve, which are kind of facing to the right. And now if I turn the visibility for that folder on and off, you can see that it's only really affecting those areas on the face and the arm. But I'm going to dial it back just a bit more. All right, and this is why I like to use a low opacity brush for this, because you can really work more gradually instead of just going for drastic shifts. But that's looking pretty good, I think. So now I'll select that top Shadows and Highlights folder, hold Shift and select the Normal folder below, press Command G to put those into a new folder, and I'm just going to call this one Main. All right, so now, because I kind of have this mood and this really like interesting background going on here with the shed and the car, I want to start to try to dial in those colors and have the colors and the tone on the detective match everything else. And the way we're going to do that is by selecting that main folder, holding Alt Option, and then clicking on the adjustment layer icon and choosing Gradient Map. Go ahead and apply a clipping mask to it. And now what we can do is select this gradient here in the properties, and we can choose the colors that we want. All right, so you'll see here as I slide this around, it's kind of crunching these colors together, but you can add as many or as few colors on here as you want with a minimum of 2 colors. Okay, so for that first color, let's go ahead and change that by clicking on this color box. And I'm going to enter the hex value 161923, which is this nice sort of dark blue color. And then for the location, let's go ahead and set it to around 17. All right, and then I'll add a second color over here. And this time I'll use the hex value 3F6264, which is a slightly lighter shade of blue. All right, and for the location for this one, I'm going to set it to around 40. And then I'm going to add a third color. And let's go ahead and change the hex value for that too. This one will be 698AB0, all right, which is even lighter. Okay, so this is an even lighter blue. And for the location here, let's move it to around 85 or 86. And then I'm going to keep that solid white all the way at the end here with a location of 100. All right, so you can now see that our gradient is looking pretty interesting. So let's go ahead and click OK to apply those changes. And then I'm going to change the blending mode from normal to multiply and reduce the opacity to around 65% or so. All right, and you can see that we're starting to get a little bit of that like moonlight kind of vibe that we're going for here. But again, I'm going to select the layer mask that's attached to that adjustment layer, press B to get my brush tool, and I'm going to start brushing this out of the highlight areas because I only really want this coloring to appear in the darker shadows and midtones. All right, so like I'll remove it from the hand a little bit, from the front of the flashlight here, just to try to make it look a little bit more gradual. Okay, so once you're happy with the way that's looking, let's select that main folder, return to the adjustment layer icon at the bottom, add a black and white adjustment layer, press Command Control in the right bracket to move it up one spot in the layer stack, and then change the blend mode from normal to soft light, and then press 4 on the keyboard to drop the opacity down to around 40%. So using a black and white adjustment layer and then changing the blending mode to either soft light or overlay gives us a nice bit of contrast here. So now I will make sure I have that adjustment layer selected, hold the Shift key, select my main folder, press Command G, and then I'm going to put that into a folder as well. And we'll just go ahead and call this one Detective. All right, so now that we're starting to build this scene, we need to work on the flashlight a little bit. So I'm going to create a new layer just above my Detective group folder and press G on the keyboard to switch over to my gradient tool. And here I want to make sure that I have a solid white fill color as my foreground color. And then I'll choose the radial gradient option up here. All right, and all I'm going to do is click and drag outwards around the end of the flashlight here where it's the brightest. And I'll change the blending mode to overlay and then just reduce the opacity a bit. Maybe I'll set it to around 40 or so, just to brighten up the end of the flashlight. Okay, but what I'll do now is add another layer on top, press G once again, but this time instead of using a solid white color, I'm going to input a value of B1CFD0, which is a sort of muted bluish color. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and click OK there, add another gradient here, and this time I'm going to press Command T to do a free transform. Going to hold the Shift key and I'm just going to stretch it out. But if you also hold Alt Option, it will stretch it from the center. All right, so something like that. Slide it over to the right a little bit and then go ahead and press Return. So now we're just starting to get a little bit more of that beam kind of look that we want. From here, what I'm going to do is hold the Control key, click on that layer and convert it into a smart object. And the reason that I'm doing this is because I want to apply a smart filter next. So let's just reduce the opacity a bit to around 70. And then I'll come up here to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and enter a blur value of around 60 pixels or so, and then press Enter or Return on the keyboard to apply those changes. All right, and now I'll apply a layer mask to that, and I'm just going to use my large black brush to paint out some of that beam on the hand here. Okay, so I just want it to look a little bit more natural. And you can also reduce the flow a little bit up here too. All right, to kind of get that beam effect. All right, and that's starting to look good. Let's go ahead and make our brush a little bit bigger. And just brush out a little bit more on the top and the bottom here. And then what I'll do is duplicate that layer by pressing Command J on the keyboard, press Command T to do a free transform, hold Control, click on that layer, and then choose Perspective. All right, so now if I zoom out, I can move my mouse over either the top right or the lower left corner of the bounding box, hold Alt Option and Shift and either drag up or down, and that's going to just extend that beam. All right, we'll have to shift it over to the right a little bit too. All right, and then because this is a smart object, I can now return to my Gaussian blur, and I'm going to increase the blur settings for this copy. So let's enter a value of around 168 or so, and then press return on the keyboard. All right, and I'm also going to go ahead and reduce the opacity of this copy, maybe down to around 25 or so. So we don't want it to be quite as intense. All right, as that beam sort of fades out, it's going to gradually lessen in opacity. So at this point, I'll grab each of those layers, or all three of those layers, put them into a group folder, and I'm just going to call it beam. And now I can put a layer mask on that, use my soft round black brush, and just blend that a little bit better with my background. All right, so I'm just getting rid of those edges to make it look more natural. All right, what I'm going to do is add a new layer below that detective layer, press G to get my gradient tool, and then I will use a solid white color, apply a radial gradient here, and then I'm just going to position this like over the right side, kind of where the shed is, and then we'll reduce the opacity down to maybe like 30 or 40%. Just so we're getting a little bit more of that light effect on the shed itself. So now what I'll do is select that layer, hold shift and select my beam folder. So I've got my flashlight beam, my detective, and that light that we just applied over the shed all selected together. Press Command G to put them into a folder, and this will now be our detective and flashlight folder. Okay, so I'm just kind of grouping all of those things together. So if I go in here, I know that if I want to control anything with either the detective or those beams that we created, I can do it right here from inside of this folder. All right, and I just like to work this way because as we add more and more layers, sometimes it can get a little bit confusing with where everything is. Okay, that's looking good. Let's go ahead and save our work, and then add another new layer that's sort of sandwiched between the car and the detective and flashlight layer. And here what I want to do is start to get rid of this kind of hard line in here between the ground from our car and that grass in the field and shed image. So all I'm going to do is use a black round brush set to around 20% opacity. I also lowered my flow a little bit. All right, and I'm just going to start to paint over this area here just to kind of blend that a little bit. All right, and then let's just go ahead and call this like shadow behind car, just so we know what that is. So at this point, our composition is really starting to take shape. We have some of our main elements here with the car, we've got the shed and the environment, and then we have our protagonist. We've got this cool looking detective here, starting to get very suspenseful and dramatic and really the mood that we're going for, right? So at this point, what I want to do is start to add some atmosphere, some other sort of elements that will just elevate this whole design. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and load up a few Photoshop brushes. Now, whenever I use Photoshop brushes like this, I like to use Envato elements. So what I love about Envato elements is that there are all these really great assets and resources that I can use. And for this particular project, I'm going to go in here to add-ons, Photoshop, and make sure that I check off this brushes box over here in the categories. Now, what I want to search for here are some sort of like fog brushes. So let's just go ahead and do a quick search here for the brush set that I want is called 150 weather brushes. All right, this one right here. And then all I have to do is download these amazing brushes and load them into Photoshop. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm also going to grab one other sort of brush pack here. And those brushes are going to be like a fog mist brush, right? So I'm going to use this set right here, mist Photoshop brushes. And I'll add links to both of these in the description, but I highly encourage you to check out Envato Elements. I tend to use it a lot in my design work anytime I need to create atmosphere like this, whether it's for brushes, for actions, for typefaces. There's just so many great resources here that you can use in your work. So definitely give that a look. So what I want to do once I've downloaded those brushes is actually show you how to load them up in Photoshop. So I'm going to create a new layer just behind my car folder here, and press F5 on the keyboard to bring up your brush panel. Now you'll see that you have to press B on the keyboard to actually select your brush first, but once you've done that, you're going to go over here into your brushes, click on this little hamburger menu here, and then scroll down to where it says import brushes. Now here I've already got my brushes downloaded, so I'm going to go ahead and load both of these up, starting with the 100 Mist Photoshop stamp brushes. All right, so just double click on those. And then if you scroll to the bottom here, you'll see that they are now loaded inside of this folder and ready to go. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for our second set of brushes. Go to the hamburger menu, import brushes, and now navigate to the folder for 150 brush effects. But for this tutorial, we're only really going to be focused with fog, even though there are some really great elements in here for things like rain, snow, and thunder as well. All right, so here I'm just going to go ahead and grab this first one for CS6 through CC, double click the ABR file, and same deal, it's going to load up those brushes into a folder for us. Right, and here you go, you can see them all down here at the bottom. So that's just how quickly and easily you can load up some of these great brushes to work with in Photoshop. So I'm going to start with my mist brush here, open up that folder, and let's just go ahead and take a look at what brushes we have here. There's a ton of brushes in here, well over 100. So let's start by using our mist brushes here. I'm just going to expand that folder for a minute and scroll down to brush 162. That's the one that I was digging before. All right, so I'm going to grab brush 162 and then make sure that I increase my opacity and flow here for the brush, and that I also have a solid white foreground color selected. And then I can just move my brushes panel to the side for a minute. Use the right bracket key on the keyboard to increase the size of this brush until the width just about matches the size of our composition, which is around 18 inches, okay? So let's go ahead and expand that as much as we can, and then all we're going to do is click one time, and now we see our brush. Okay, so it creates this pretty cool effect, and really what I'm looking at here is just behind the car. Like I want to create a little bit of atmosphere and separation between the car and the detective, so that's the main area where I'm looking right now. Okay, and I'm just going to press return there to apply that change, and then I'll go ahead and apply a layer mask to it, press G to get my gradient tool, select the linear gradient option with a solid black to transparent gradient selected, and then I'm going to click and drag down to just fade that out here. All right, so we've got a little bit of atmosphere happening between the car and the detective now, which is really helping to give us some of that separation. But let's go ahead and reduce the opacity of that layer quite a bit. I'm going to bring it down to like 40 or so, just by pressing the number 4 on the keyboard, and then taking a look at what that looks like before and after. Now let's go ahead and add another new layer, press B once again, and then again, if you don't have your brushes panel open, the shortcut for that is F5 on the keyboard, and that's going to open up your brushes here. All right, so let's go ahead, bring that over. We'll go over to our brushes, and this time let's go back and grab maybe 167. That's another nice looking brush here, or 165. Yeah, I think 165 could probably work pretty nicely as well. So all I'm going to do is use the right bracket to once again enlarge my brush, and then I'll just click one time to create that fog. And then I'm going to press Command T to kind of move that over here, position it where I want on the left side. And then we'll do the same thing as before by reducing the opacity. So let's bring this way down to like 20%. Okay, apply a layer mask to it. Press G on the keyboard, making sure that you have a solid black to transparent linear gradient selected. And then I'm just going to fade off some of those hard edges. So now I'll grab both of those brushes and press Command G on the keyboard to put them into a group folder, which I will rename Atmosphere. And we've now got some nice atmosphere happening here in our photo. But we're not going to stop there. We're going to add even more to the very top, like in front of the car. All right, because in a real environment, you would see it behind the car, in front of the car. It would kind of be everywhere. So we want to add that new layer on top and try out a different brush. All right, so to do this, I want to return to my brushes panel, and let's just move this over a little bit so we can see what we're doing. And I'm just going to scroll up here and collapse that folder. And now I will expand my fog effect brushes. So let's maybe grab fog 3. And then all we're going to do is make sure we have a solid white fill color selected and click to add our brush here. All right, so I'm going to have to do a free transform just to make it a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to drag it way down here at the bottom. Now, obviously, this is still a bit heavy and intense, so we're going to play around with the opacity for this layer a little bit too. So let's go ahead and change the blending mode from normal to overlay. And then I'm going to add another new layer above that. Press B to get my brush tool once again. And let's go ahead and change it up, trying one of these other first few brushes here, maybe 6. Let's try 6. All right, and I'm just going to make that as big as I can. Click to add that brush here, and then do a free transform and drag outwards from any of the 4 corners while holding Alt Option on the keyboard. And then we're just going to drag it down here to the bottom. All right, and then let's drop the opacity down to like 30 or 40% just by pressing 3 or 4 on the keyboard. And then what I'm going to do is grab both of those layers, put them into a new folder, and I'll just go ahead and call that one fog brushes. Now, obviously we have this hard line down here at the bottom, which I want to get rid of. So I'm going to add a new layer in between the fog brushes and the car layer, and just use my gradient tool to add a black to transparent gradient on the bottom here. All right, so let's just go ahead and put that into a folder. I'll just call it fade, so we know what that is. And then for our fog brushes here, I just want to play around with those a little bit more. Okay, and you can also continue to add some more of these brushes in here if you want to just really get that effect looking good. So I started off with brush 3, and now I'm going to go ahead and use the first brush here, just making sure that I have a solid white fill color selected. And I'm going to drag this one down so it's kind of off of the bottom edge, and do the same thing. Just reduce the opacity. See if I can get that to start blending nicely with my other fog brushes. And it's looking pretty good. Right, so I'm just going to move that off of the bottom here. Grab all 3 of those and maybe increase the size a little bit more. All right, so I just don't want it to be too bright is the main thing that I'm looking at here. So I have my first one set to overlay, my middle one here set to around 40% opacity with a normal blending mode. And then I've got another one on top here set to around 30 or 40%. Okay, and then I'm just going to put those into a folder at the very top of the layers palette. So at this point, I think we're ready to add our title treatment. And if you're wondering what a title treatment is, it's basically just a fancy word for a logo, except for a movie poster or a TV show poster. So I'm just going to add a new layer here, just below my detective and flashlight group folder. Grab my text tool, and I'm just going to type out the word abducted. All right, and for this, I'm just going to be using a free typeface called Kaluna. And I believe this is a font that I picked up from defont.com, and I'll leave a link for that in the description below. Now for the size, I'm setting it to around 328 or so, and just positioning it here so that it kind of follows the line of the flashlight and the arm of the detective. And we also have the tracking set to around -20. Now let's go ahead and change our fill color here. And for this, I'm going to use the hex value 83532D, which is this nice sort of orangish brown color. And the reason I'm using this color is because orange and blue are complementary colors, and that is a color scheme that you see in a lot of movie posters. So I'm going to use that for now, and then I'll go up to the File menu and choose Place Embedded. And now we're going to import a texture. So I'm going to open up this free texture image from Unsplash, this Michael Schiffer texture, which is really nice looking. And I'll also leave a link to that in the description below. And what I want to do now is apply a clipping mask. So I'm just going to hover my cursor between that texture layer and the text layer while holding the Alt-Option key, and you'll see that it changes to this little downward pointing arrow with a box here. So go ahead and click on that, and now you will only see the texture inside of these letters. Okay, so now what I can do is just move this texture around freely inside here. I can play with the size a little bit. Maybe I want to rotate it until I find something that I'm pretty happy with here. And that's one of the things that I love about working with clipping masks is that once it's clipped to your image, you don't have to worry about it like spilling outside of the edges or anything. All right, I'm losing a little bit too much of the letter D here, so I'm just going to scale this down a bit. And now I'll just change the blending mode from normal to multiply so that it blends with our color a bit more. Okay, but what I want to do here is sort of brighten this up a little bit. So I'm going to add a new layer just above my type layer, press Command, Control, and the right bracket to move that up one spot in the layer stack. And then I'm just going to use a large soft round brush with a white fill color. And I'm just going to brush in here on top of my texture. All right, and change the blending mode to overlay. I think overlay will look pretty good. All right, just to help brighten that up a bit. And if we need to, we can also add a layer mask here or just reduce the opacity a little bit so that it's not so bright. Okay, so here I've just reduced the opacity to around 60% or so. All right, and then I'm going to add another text layer. This time I will click here to add my text, and I'll just type out based on a true story. And you don't have to, but I'm going to change the font here to another one called Barlow. And Barlow is actually a free Google font that you can download the entire family for free. And it's a really nice looking typeface. And you'll get all of these styles here, which you can see I'm looking at right now. And I'm going to go ahead and use Barlow Condensed Medium for this. Now I'm going to set the size much lower to maybe around 40 pixels or so, 40 points. And I'm also going to open the tracking quite a bit here as well. So let's set that tracking to like 450 and then change the color to the hex value 5F6564, which is this nice sort of muted grayish blue color. Okay, and then what I want to do is center this above my title treatment, just so that it fits nicely here. And what I'll do sometimes to make sure that it's centered is add a new layer and just grab my rectangle tool, and I'll create a rectangle about the same size as my title treatment or the object I want to center it with. I'll fill that layer with a solid color, and then go ahead and hold the Command Control key and select your text layer at the same time, then go to the Align panel and just choose Center. And now I can just get rid of that shape, and I'll know that it's centered with my title treatment. All right, so now I'm going to select all those layers here, and it looks like I have an empty layer here, so I'm not going to select that one. I'll just hold the Command Control key and click on it to deselect it, but put the rest of these into a new folder called TT for title treatment. Okay, and now we can just go ahead and get rid of that extra layer here that we created. But what I'd like to do now is start to add some overall color correction, right? Some global adjustments. And to start, I'll go up here to my very top folder, the fog brushes, then go down to my adjustment layer icon and add a color lookup adjustment layer. Now, once again, I'll click on this Load 3D LUT drop-down menu and come all the way down here to the bottom until you find your teal orange plus contrast 3DL file, and then go ahead and click OK. And that's going to apply this nice coloring effect to your entire image, this sort of nice teal orange color combo that I was talking about, which you see a lot in movie posters. But it's obviously a little bit too heavy, so I'm going to reduce the opacity for that to around 40% or so. And then I'll go ahead and add a levels adjustment layer on top of that. And all I'm going to do here is move my right slider in until it's set to around 175 or so. Right, something like that, just to like brighten the image, makes it a lot more punchy, right? Really getting those highlights to pop out, which is cool. So now I'll grab both of those layers, throw them into a group folder, and I'll call this one CC for color correction. So we have our TT folder for title treatment and CC for color correction. I feel like I need a whole video just with acronyms for what these things stand for, but hopefully if you're following along, everything is making sense so far. All right, so let's keep going. So now I'm going to add a layer just above this one, and I'm going to add another gradient at the bottom here. So I'll make sure I have a solid black fill color selected and just fade from the bottom up. All right, and that's going to give us this nice faded effect here on the bottom. And I'll put this into a folder here and just call it Vignette. And that is going to help us for the next part, which is adding our credit block. Okay, so I've used this credit block in a previous tutorial, so I'm just going to open up that same one, drag it in here, and help to add some of those realistic movie poster details. And we will drag this into our document, click OK. And I'm just going to play around with the size and positioning. I know that I want it to be centered. I'm going to place it down here on the bottom, and that's why we darken the bottom as well. And of course, we just want to play with the lines here a little bit and maybe change some of our type. All right, so what I'm going to do actually is just get rid of this bottom line. Or we can do a return here and bring that up so that it's 3 lines. All right, and then let's go ahead and change the color, maybe to match our color scheme a little bit better. So here I'm going to enter the hex value B9BFBD, and then go ahead and click OK. All right, so we can zoom in here. I still have some of the same info from the last time that I was using this. So I'm just going to go ahead and change this here. Enter a name. This is where you would typically put like a name of the actor. So let's just enter another couple of names here. We'll put our movie title, which is Abducted. And the rest of the stuff you can kind of leave as like generic or placeholder text. Okay, but again, here I want to make sure that everything is nice and centered. But I have my smart guides turned on, thankfully, so the center looks like it's right about there. And then we'll throw this into a group folder and call it Credit Block. And we can just scale that up a little bit more, I think, and tap it down a little bit as well. So now what I like to do as we're starting to get towards the end here is create some noise. And what the noise is going to do is just add a little bit of grain on top of our entire image. And part of the reason that this works so well is because when you're compositing different images together, some are going to be sharper and cleaner than others. So this noise just helps to tie everything together so it feels like everything has the sort of same amount of grain applied to it. All right, and the way that I like to create noise is by holding the Alt Option key, clicking the new layer icon, and I'll just call this noise. And then I'm going to change the color to gray, and the mode, change it from normal to linear light. And we also want to check off this box here that says fill with linear light neutral color 50% gray. And you'll now see that you have this gray noise layer on the very top. Now from here, I'll hold Control and convert this into a smart object so that I can apply my noise filter. And by leaving this layer as a smart object, it's going to make it so we can always go back in and play with those noise settings if we need to. So let's go to the filter menu and choose Noise, Add Noise. And here I always like to use Uniform Monochromatic Noise. And I'm just going to set this to around 23% or so. And then what I'll do is reduce the opacity to 50. We'll also bring the flow down to around 50 and put this into a group folder called Noise. All right, so we've now got that grain applied. It's very subtle, but it kind of lightens the shadows a little bit, kind of makes everything feel like it's really, you know, together and cohesive. So it's a really good way to add some of those finishing touches to your poster designs. Okay, and from here, what we can do is use the keyboard shortcut, Command Control, Alt Option, Shift, and E, and that's going to merge all of our layers together into one layer at the very top of our layer stack. So once you've done that, go ahead and hold the Control key and convert that layer into a smart object. So you've got your entire poster now merged at the very top of your layer stack. And this is where we're going to go ahead and add those nice finishing touches using the Camera Raw filter. So I'm going to change the name of this layer to Cam Raw, go up to the filter menu and choose Camera Raw filter. Now, once you're in here, you can play around with these settings, but the settings that I'm about to put in are the ones that I find work the best for this poster. So to start, I'm going to reduce the contrast to maybe around -24 or 25, then increase my shadows to maybe 15 to 20, somewhere in that range, just to bring a little bit more detail out of the shadows. I'm going to increase my texture to around 25 or 26, bring the clarity up to 25 or 26 as well, and that's going to give us sort of like a high pass effect. And then let's go ahead and increase our vibrance to around 10 and reduce the saturation to maybe -2 or so. Very subtle. And now we can go ahead and click OK, and you'll see the difference here in the before and after we've applied that Camera Raw filter. All right, so now you can see the difference there as I turn the visibility for that layer on and off, that it really adds some nice finishing touches. So I can now get rid of that background layer, which I probably should have gotten rid of a while ago. I'll take all of my layers, throw them into one final group folder, and just call it artwork, because I love to keep my layers nice and organized so I know where everything is. So I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial and hopefully found some of these tips and tricks useful so that you can start applying them to your own work. If you did enjoy this video, please go ahead and smash that like button. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you never miss a video. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for joining me today. This is Eric Vasquez here, and we'll see you next time. Peace.